Well, you've likely seen the narrative arc played out in reality TV programs such as The Biggest Loser. Overweight contestants, publicly shamed, pushed to their limits, all in an effort to lose weight and win money, of course. Well, joining us now to detail what behaviors these kinds of shows and all of those diet books are really doing to us is Dr. Yoni Freedhoff. He is the author of The Diet Fix, Why Diets Fail and How to Make Yours Work. Hello, welcome to the agenda.
Thank you.
We are going to be talking a lot about diets during this half hour and the culture of dieting and what it says about who we are and where we are societally. But take us back. Where does this idea of dieting come from? Where did it emerge from?
It's actually been around for an awfully long time. So I collect antique weight loss memorabilia. There's actually a display at the Ontario Science Centre of some of my stuff. And one of the things that I enjoy the most is this book from the turn of the century, the 1900, I think, in 4 it was written. And it was about fad diets. So this is not a new phenomena, fad diets. At the time, one of the most popular fad diets was getting your own cow. So you would go to this sanatorium in Switzerland, and you would be assigned your own cow. And for a period of 1 week, the only thing you were supposed to consume was milk from this specific cow. And then there was also walking barefoot in the grass. I'm sure it was very idyllic and lovely. But fad diets have been something that have preyed upon society for an awfully long time. And I think it's preying on human nature. I mean, we want easy, we want magic. And unfortunately, there is no such thing when it comes to healthy living. The inconvenient truth of healthy living is that it requires effort. I think that we've been pushed as a society to believe that effort also requires suffering. And that's where I think we've gone wrong.
Okay, there are, I think in your book you said when it went to publication, you mentioned a number of
37,000
diet books available. Everything Atkins to Suzanne Simers, on and on. So someone will tell you to not eat bread at all, the other will tell you only to eat bread. Is there a common feature in all of these?
Well, yes, I think it's suffering. So all of these sorts of approaches...
But every book says that you won't suffer doing my diet.
Well, I suppose they all say that, and it is important, I imagine, for the diet books to say that. But, you know, suffering is being pigeonholed into eating one specific way and not being allowed to stray. Suffering is being told that the foods you truly love in life are foods you can no longer have. Many people, when they undertake dieting efforts, feel that they cannot have specific foods, and they cannot give in to temptation, so to speak, and that willpower is the key to their success. Willpower is only required if there's suffering. And I don't think, the thing about food is not just fuel, right? So as a species, food plays very important roles for us. I think it's the world's oldest social network. We comfort with food because it's actually comforting. That feeling we get when we need comfort food and we have it is real. It's actually an impact on our body's cortisol levels. So we medicate with food in a sense, appropriately. And then we celebrate with food. You know, there's an archaeological dig from 35,000 years ago demonstrating a massive feast at the wake of a shaman, is what they think was going on at the time. I guess we don't know for sure. I guess all I'm saying is that our species uses food for a lot of different important reasons. And a lot of these books and a lot of these approaches and sort of the societal narrative around weight management is that if you're going to succeed, you can't be normal when it comes to food.
Explain this to me. Most of these books will suggest leaving out a particular food or a certain grouping of food. They all seem to have that in common as well. Why is that an effective strategy when it comes to dieting?
Well, so many of the get rid of foods approaches, they are either getting rid of foods that are intrinsically very high in calories. So the low-fat approach, getting rid of fats, in theory, should help people because gram per gram, there's more calories in a gram of fat than there is in a gram of carbohydrates or proteins. And then low carb, gets rid of carbs, with the theory being that they are more difficult to resist in some cases, and so getting rid of them helps. But I think those approaches will both work in a sense, because getting rid of one food group ups the other two, including protein. And protein, of all the food sort of macronutrient simplifications, you know, we can drill it down, food's 3 things, it's carbs, fat, and protein, and a combination of those. We know that diets rich in protein are more filling. All that said, people succeed with every approach. You know, so I'm very equal opportunity when it comes to weight management. The key for knowing if your diet is a good one for you is if you can honestly say to yourself, I could happily live like this for the rest of my life. The key word being happily. Tolerating it, well, you will not tolerate food for the rest of your life. If your life is merely tolerable around food, it's not going to be long-lived.
Right. I am not unlike many people. I went on my first diet 2 years ago ever. Tolerated it. didn't last.
No. I mean, again, food's important to us. And so I guess what I espouse and prescribe is you need to live the healthiest life you can actually enjoy. And so calories, they're the currency of weight. Now, as the currency of weight, people sometimes get hung up. It's true that 100 calories of one food will have a different impact than 100 calories of another food, both in terms of the calories our body's able to extract from those foods, and also in terms of fullness and satiety. It's also true that different individuals will respond differently. 100 calories in one person, they may have a different impact than 100 calories in a different person. We all know that person who can clap their hands and lose weight. But it is the currency of weight. And so in order to know you're going to do this well long term, your calories absolutely need to be managed. But they need to be managed within the context of a life that you can honestly enjoy.
If we were having this conversation 10 years ago, say, we'd be talking almost exclusively about diet books. Now enter into the conversation diet programs. So we mentioned The Biggest Loser. It's not the only one. There are other ones.
Yep.
That's the message, perhaps, that is trying to be sent, is that work hard, you can do this, you can achieve your goal weight. Or what do you think the message of these are? What are they really promoting?
I think they're promoting everything that's bad about weight loss messaging in society today. You know, they are teaching viewers that scales measure something other than weight. So when I step on a scale, when you step on a scale, the scale will tell us exactly what we weigh at that moment in time. What the scale will not tell us is what The Biggest Loser tells us it tells us, which is it will not tell us if we should have self-worth. It will not tell us if we're being successful. It will not tell us if we should have good self-esteem. I mean, The Biggest Loser, the message there, it's twofold. One is that to succeed requires inordinate amounts of suffering. I mean, truly, that show epitomizes suffering. It's exercise till you puke and never eat anything good.
And never go to work.
And then you'll lose weight. That's right, and never go to work either. So reality TV and reality are very different beasts. The other thing it teaches us, though, is that if you want it badly enough, you should be able to do that. And so, in a sense, I think viewers are set up to fail whether they do it or don't do it. Meaning that those who watch that show and then think to themselves, oh my God, I can't do that. Well, they've already, in a sense, failed themselves because they are taught that if they wanted it badly enough, they could do that. And then those people who actually go about undertaking ridiculous extremes of effort, well, ultimately they'll quit because they are ridiculous extremes of effort. Nobody does that forevermore, not even the contestants on The Biggest Loser, where I've interviewed a bunch of them. And all of the people I've interviewed have told me the same thing. 75 to 85% of contestants gain their weight back. Among those who don't, many will have bariatric surgery to try to keep the weight off, or they now have a career as a function of their experience. If I could tell, well, if I could tell everybody in my office, listen, if you lose, 100 pounds, I'll get you a six-figure income annually to be a spokesperson or a celebrity trainer, that's motivating. But again, that's not real life. Real life is people going back to their real lives. And that effort that is suggested by that show is not livable.
Okay, I think it was last season, The Biggest Loser, lots of controversy when I think it was the winning contestant dropped something like 150 pounds. And there was a lot of controversy about the amount of weight that person had lost. How bad is that, or yeah, I'm assuming it's bad, how bad is it for you to lose that amount of weight in such a short period of time?
Well, it's impossible to speak about the particular contestant, but what I will say is that rapid weight loss has risk. So it has risk from the perspective of the body in terms of increased risk of things like gallstones, and people can have untoward side effects of rapid loss, hair loss, feeling just crappy all the time. And I imagine there's viewers right now who have done rapid losses who have felt that way. The other thing, though, that studies on rapid weight loss show that we lose inordinate or disproportionate amounts of muscle while we lose weight rapidly, and that show is as rapid as you can get. There was actually a study done by the doctors involved in that show, looking at the impact that show has on contestants. What it found was that weight loss through Biggest Loser style exercise and starvation and suffering, it had such an impact on contestants' metabolism, but by the time they were done the show, they were burning a meal fewer calories a day than we would have expected just on the basis of weight loss. What I mean by that is that if they had lost that weight other ways, for instance through bariatric surgery, which has a comparable rate of loss, that those people who lost it rapidly through surgery had higher metabolisms, losing the same amount of weight as the Biggest Loser contestants did.
So long term, that's a better deal.
Long-term, the surgery absolutely is a better deal, and for so many reasons, but from the perspective of the Biggest Loser, really it would seem that metabolically it's a dangerous approach.
Okay, I just want us to clarify one thing, because we don't want everyone who's watching this now saying, well, I'm going to sign up for bariatric surgery. We're not saying it's the fix for all.
Well, bariatric surgery is an option for everybody who struggles with weight, and I don't think it's a bad option. Medicine is about providing options to people. So if you think about all of the various chronic conditions that we've got, whether it's blood pressure, diabetes, arthritis, there are lifestyle changes that can help for all of those, not just with weight management. In many cases, there are medications that can help, and in some cases, there's surgery. Even with hypertension, there are some surgeries for hypertension now, for high blood pressure. And so my job as a physician, I think any physician's job, is to provide patients with enough information to make an informed decision. And bariatric surgery's got great track record. So I often consider it a great last resort. And I don't have a surgical program. I'm a non-surgical weight loss guy. But ultimately, if I could not lose weight any other way, and it was having an impact on my quality of life or my health, I would absolutely consider bariatric surgery.
You say any other way. I mean, aren't there just a couple of ways to lose weight? Cut the number of calories or food that's going into your body, or exercising, or surgery, right? Those are our three ways.
And there are some medications that can be used, although they are nothing to write home about at this point. I mean, if we had weight loss in a bottle, whether that bottle was a prescription strength bottle or whether that was an over-the-counter bottle, I don't think we'd be having this discussion. Truly, we don't have weight loss in a bottle at this point.
You have been studying obesity and how it's evolved, our perceptions of obesity over years. I mean, we're going to talk about it for a half an hour. There are many programs that talk about weight loss and obesity, books, magazines, everything. How has it looked at 2014? How do you think obesity is looked at in popular culture?
I think it's hugely stigmatized. I think it is...
More so than in the past?
I would say yes, actually. It is something that the media, the entertainment industry, and just people on the street feel is fair game for ridicule and fair game for vilification. I think about, I read Harry Potter with my 7-year-old, and I was reading about the Dursleys. The Dursleys are Harry Potter's sort of cousins, and they're sort of the mortal enemies of Harry Potter in his home environment. Their weights were high. And there were other weights in the story of Harry Potter. There are other characters who had high weights that weren't evil. So it's hard. I'm not saying every person who had weight to lose in Harry Potter was portrayed in a negative light. But the Dursleys' weights were written in a way to specifically use their weight as a means to epitomize evil and sloth and gluttony, the narrative that I think many people believe to be true about folks with weight management. And I remember when I was reading it with my daughter, first of all, I had a chat with her about how, you know what, I don't think that these are funny jokes. I don't think that this is how we should be thinking about people who struggle with weight. But I also couldn't help but wonder how she would be thinking or feeling internally if she herself struggled with weight. And I work in my office. My office is a pilot project with the Ministry of Health here where we're working with parents of kids who struggle. And there are plenty of 7-year-olds out there, sadly, who are struggling. And I can't imagine what it does to them. We watched a movie on Netflix the other day. It was The Croods. It was a really funny movie, and there was a fat joke about 30 seconds in. I mean, this is the world we live in. We live in a world that thinks that it's laziness. And I don't think that there's been an epidemic loss of willpower in 7-year-olds, yet obesity rates in 7-year-olds have tripled over the course of the past 30 years. Kids haven't changed, neither have adults. The world has changed around us.
Well, what has changed in terms of obesity is last year the American Medical Association named it a disease.
Yes.
First time, right?
Yeah.
Is that an effective thing to do?
I think it's important. You know, I think of it in a sense, we used to also look down at people who struggle with mood disturbances once upon a time, right? It was not considered a disease. We should just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We would never think to tell someone right now with depression that all they should do is pull themselves up by their bootstraps. If this was about guilt, shame, or laziness, the world would be slim. You know, there is no shortage of guilt and shame in the folks who struggle with weight. That's what we are taught we should feel if we struggle, and I think that's very toxic. Labeling it a disease, first of all, I think it's an accurate label as a chronic disease. It has a lot of impact on health and quality and quantity of life, especially as the extremes go higher. But my hope is that this labeling will slowly help society to break out of the gluttonous sloth narrative that we've found ourselves in. that is perpetuated by shows like The Biggest Loser, but also just by editorial boards and by newspaper articles. It's not just the entertainment industry. I mean, Biggest Loser, it's like modern day gladiators. We torture people and watch it for fun on TV. It's horrifying. But that message, although it's really, crystallized for The Biggest Loser, it's everywhere, every day.
I want to read you something. This was written in the New York Times by two professors of psychology at the University of Richmond. They're talking in this article about the psychological consequences of calling obesity a disease. Here's what they wrote. When medical fields make decisions without considering the psychological consequences, they do so at their own peril, or perhaps more accurately, at the peril of the people they most seek to help. Calling obesity a disease may make people feel better about their bodies, but it also may, and this is the key part, but it also may contribute to the maintenance rather than reduction of obesity. Is there an adverse effect to calling obesity a disease?
So I personally don't think so. So it's always about how you teach and frame things. It's not about black and white. So I remember reading that article too, and it was an interesting study paradigm that they put together, and they decided that telling people obesity was a disease led them to eat differently. Ultimately, I do not believe that there is any way we could possibly increase the shame and guilt that people with obesity already feel. I do, on the other hand, think that by trying to change the discussion into one of, this is a condition like many others that does require help and is not the fault of the individual, is something that will benefit obesity and its treatment and prevention as a whole. And so I am very pro this labeling. Now, there will always be people who disagree with one another. That's what makes the world interesting. But I don't think anybody can conclusively state with one way or the other. But I think about this specific discussion. It's interesting because virtually all of our chronic diseases, whether it's high blood pressure, whether it's arthritis, these are diseases, in fact, that can be prevented and treated with lifestyle, just like obesity. Yet we don't say boo about calling those things diseases, despite the fact we absolutely can prevent them and treat them through lifestyle.
Right, because we often say, society often says, like, you chose to be obese versus you chose, we don't say you chose to have a heart attack.
You got it. And yet, that is what I think this definition will help with, is getting over ourselves in a sense, and getting past this narrative that just because there are lifestyle things that people can do to manage weight doesn't mean that obesity itself is not in fact a disease. I think about surgery. For instance, a lot of people, they are uncomfortable with bariatric surgery. Some people say that taxpayers shouldn't pay for it because, again, it's this blame-based paradigm where somebody with obesity did this to themselves. I think about the surgeries we do all the time that people, so to speak, did to themselves. What about the guy who's got bypass surgery because he didn't bother taking his diabetic pills for 10 years? It happens all the time. We don't say boo about that guy. I'll tell you, it's a lot easier to remember to take your diabetes medication than it is to manage your weight, especially given the world is stacked against us from a weight perspective.
I want to play an advertisement. This ran in Georgia, in the state of Georgia, a couple years ago. It was an ad that tried to tackle the problem, the epidemic of childhood obesity. Just take a look at this.
Mom, why am I fat?
Okay, that's from Georgia. I want to put up an ad. This is from the New York City Department of Health. Okay, so take a look at that. What do you think of these two ads?
Well, so I think the Georgia ad is, quite frankly, horrifying.
Sad. It made me feel sad.
It absolutely is a sad ad, but it's also an awful ad, because what it's suggesting is, again, that this is the fault of an individual. This is the fault of either the mother or the child in that particular narrative. It's hard to say, but what they're vilifying in the advertisement is having obesity. Whereas the advertisement from New York is vilifying a behavior that in and of itself may well contribute to obesity, but it's a behavior that's not healthy at any weight. In that particular ad, it was about pouring on the pounds, right? It was about sugar-sweetened beverages. And just recently, the World Health Organization came out and said, this is a big problem, added sugar in our lives. And we should be trying to limit this and change this behavior. Ultimately, there are absolutely behaviors involved in healthy living. And there are some, like drinking sugar-sweetened beverages, that are clear targets that we should be focusing on as a society. But to vilify children who already are bullied by their weight on a television commercial, that is very worrisome to me.
Okay, in the Georgia case, I'm assuming that this commercial got put together by a bunch of people in a room who had a lot of discussions about the strategy that they should employ in this commercial. Why would they take a tough love approach?
Because that's the approach society wants, right? That is the biggest loser approach. Don't sugarcoat it. Yell at the kid. Make him run around on a track. Make him have a horribly restrictive diet. And in turn, really risk his relationship with food, his self-esteem, his body image. Kids, I don't think, are the people we should be focusing on when it comes to childhood obesity. I think it should be parents. My office, as I mentioned...
Meaning what? That parents are responsible for what their children eat?
I think to a large degree, especially young kids. I mean, so I've got kids 9, 7, and 4. It's not as if they're going to the supermarket or, you know, it's my wife and I who make decisions around the life that we live. And it's not that parents don't love their kids more than we love, or don't love their kids as much as we love our kids. It's that this is non-intuitive. You know, people often think that it all boils down to, oh, just eat less, exercise more, and that's as useful a piece of advice as buy low, sell high is to becoming a millionaire. It's true, it's a truism, but it will not work long term.
We have talked about Georgia and the New York campaigns. I want to talk about what's going on in this country, because you say let's not blame the individuals, or let's not just hold them responsible. Let's collectively be responsible for this. How would you characterize the Canadian government's approach to obesity?
Well, I don't think we have a real approach right now in regard to obesity in Canada. Ontario's doing something. So Ontario, with its Healthy Kids panel, has invested some money, including in my office.
And they're putting the calories up on the menus. If this...
Well, at least they're proposing it, right? I don't think it's been passed yet in terms of it actually happening. But absolutely, these are the things we need to see happen. We need to change the environment. So the analogy I like best is from a gentleman from Yale. His name is David Katz. He's a preventative health doctor there, and a really brilliant man when it comes to analogies. And the one that he's talked about the most is that this is a flood. You know, this is a flood of calories. This is a flood of childhood obesity. When you've got a flood, there are some things that are important. Sure, knowing how to swim is important. So I do think that there is a role for personal responsibility and teaching and understanding from parents, from health officials, and so forth. But if the only thing you did in a floodplain was teach people how to swim, when you've got this torrential current that doesn't stop, even the strongest swimmers, they lose strength and stop swimming. We need a levee, you know, so we need to change the environment. Again, I don't think that we've seen an epidemic loss of willpower. I think that people have not changed, but the world has. And so if the world has changed, well, we need to start focusing on those things that have changed. And calories on menus and restaurant culture and advertising to kids and nutrition in schools and so on. There's a ton of sandbags we could fill. It's interesting, sometimes people point at one intervention and say, oh, well, put calories on menus. That's not going to cure this problem. Of course it's not going to. There's a lot of things that contribute to this one problem. That's one sandbag. Pointing at one sandbag and saying, hey, that sandbag is not going to stem this flood, well, that kind of means you don't understand how floods work. So one of the sandbags that people often point to is the food industry, that this is an industry that markets and things incorrectly and targets children in a bad way. Sure. What's their responsibility in all of this? I actually don't think that, in a sense, they have any. And I don't mean that in a good way or a bad way. The food industry's responsibility as corporations are to sell food and to maximize profit. That is what corporations do. I think we as a society, and our government especially, needs to stop expecting the food industry to behave any differently. So if profits and health collide, the food industry will get on board. Of course, it's profit. But if they don't, they won't, and they will undermine it every way. And so if I'm finger pointing, although I do finger point at the industry when they're deceitful with their advertising and with their messaging, and I don't think they should be allowed to get away with that. You know, for them to sell sugar water, for instance, that's their right. But what we need to consider is whether the government should or could do anything about that. I do think that some obvious targets are advertising to kids. We know that kids don't discern truth from advertising, and there are studies that show even if the foods advertised are healthful, that the brand association increases or influences unhealthy choices when these kids are adults. There's very cool research that's recently come out that shows that to be true. And it's not surprising, brand association's what they're paying for. I think that we need to change the landscape in our supermarkets. Our supermarkets right now have a bevy of boxes with, highly sugary, highly processed foods that are not good for us, yet the fronts of those packages claim that they are. Our government could stop allowing food manufacturers to sell garbage with health claims.
We only have a couple seconds left, but I want to ask you, just before we leave, what is the trigger? What's the impetus that's going to get us to change how we behave, how we regulate these things? Because we've been talking about these problems for a long time.
Well, sadly, I think the trigger is going to be when we don't have a choice. When our healthcare system is so burdened by diet and weight-related illnesses that politicians will have to stand up and say, you know what, we are going to do something, because we can't afford not to if you still want to enjoy healthcare as you currently know it.
That's a sad conclusion, that we're just going to have to wait till the problem gets too big.
It's very sad, but I think, especially with this current government, federal government, it does not appear that health is really part of their official mandate.
Dr. Yoni Freedhoff, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.